Anne here, and this is More Than a Love Interest, the show where we talk about the arcs of female characters in film. Today we are going to talk about the second Disney princess, the real trendsetter, Cinderella. There is a lot of pearl clutching about Disney princesses from both sides of the political spectrum, and Cinderella seems to be the main cause for complaint, for some reason. The biggest concerns I've seen are that she has no agency in her own story, she's overly reliant on a man, and there is too much emphasis on beauty. So let's address these claims in order. To talk about agency, let's review the plot and Cinderella's role in it by comparing how often she gets to impact the story and how often outside elements impact her. So the things that happen over which Cinderella has no real power are Lady Tremaine giving her more chores to keep her from going to the ball, the mice fixing her dress, the stepsisters destroying her dress, the fairy godmother getting her ready, the prince seeking her out at the ball, Lady Tremaine locking her up, the mice freeing her, and the prince marrying her. And what does Cinderella do? Well, her best. She rescues the mice and is kind to all the animals, most of whom are instrumental in getting her out of the locked tower at the end. She is kind to her step-family.
Good morning, Drizella. Sleep well? As if you cared.
Despite them definitely not deserving it and being ungrateful about it. But this is pretty much the end of her agency. Unlike with Snow White, where her kindness has a direct impact on how her story ends, Cinderella has no equivalent effect on the plot. The fairy godmother showing up out of nowhere is not really explained, or why the woman has never come to help before. The prince spotting her in the crowd is hand-waved as fairy tale romance.
A pretty plot for fairy tales, sire.
Even her triumphant escape by trying on the slippers orchestrated by her animal friends. So I would agree that she has less agency than many of the other princesses, but I also think that is kind of the point. As I said in my last episode, the target demographic here is children, and children are going to feel trapped and powerless by their circumstances. Hopefully, of course, not to the extent that they have an abusive parent and siblings, but kids are accustomed to a world where they have little ability to affect any kind of change. And a story where the heroine is rescued because of her perseverance and unrelenting hope can be inspiring. In fact, Walt Disney himself considered Cinderella his favorite character because of this. He related to her because he saw her as a hardworking person, belittled and disregarded by circumstance, who simply lands a good break that lets her inner strength stand out to the world. And he felt that was similar to his own experience with trying to break into the animation industry. Sometimes you just need to catch a break for people to see your value. And isn't that what Cinderella stories are actually about? Not about the romance, which barely exists in this movie, or about the pretty dress and shoes. It's been an extremely popular trope for centuries because the point isn't that you'll just get something handed to you if you sit back and act helpless. The point of these tales is that persevering through difficult times while staying hopeful instead of becoming jaded is hard, but will pay off in a substantial way. And that is the message of this movie. Cinderella is in a terrible situation and cannot get out, but she puts up with it and stays positive and is actively kind to others, both those who are as trapped as she is and those who are trapping her. Then she takes a stand.
Why, that means I can go too.
And that kicks off the events that lead to her eventual escape.
Well, why not?
So does Cinderella have agency? No, but that is the point of the story. Everyone is going to feel like they can't get out of a situation because of an external force at some point in their lives. And having a story where the protagonist gets through it and gets a better life afterward is very important. Now let's talk about the complaints concerning Cinderella's over-reliance on a man. To do that, we are going to go through her character arc using the heroine's journey and see how important that man really is. There's a link in the description for more information about the journey, but it starts with a separation from the feminine. Since this plot structure is generally found in coming-of-age stories, this often means leaving the safety of the family unit or upbringing and going out into the world. For Cinderella, the opening narration reveals that she is separated from everything: her father, her mother, her situation in society, having a caring family. So any number of things can fit the bill here, but I'm going to go with the more symbolic idea that she is separated from herself as her own person with inherent value as an individual. In an early scene, she counsels the dog to make peace with the cat, even when the cat is openly antagonizing him.
Suppose they heard you upstairs. You know the orders. So if you don't want to lose a nice warm bed, you'd better get rid of those dreams.
Which parallels her own approach for dealing with her stepfamily.
You'd better get rid of those dreams.
Up until the ball, she is willing to accept whatever comes her way and to be the subservient maid they expect of her. Her arc is realized by her deciding that she is her own person and deserves to have her needs met for once. The second step of the journey involves finding allies in her new circumstances. For Cinderella, this would be all of her animal friends, but specifically the mice. She rescues them from traps, then feeds and clothes them, and so they help her however they can. Some of the mice are female, but the named ones are male and all the other animals are male, so these make up her new masculine allies. Side note, but Cinderella rescuing mice out of cages to foreshadow her own character arc is, not subtle. So I'm not sure why so many people misunderstand her story. Next, the heroine faces the road of trials with her allies. Cinderella starts this path by standing up to her stepmother and insisting that she too should be allowed to go to the ball. Lady Tremaine stipulates what she must do beforehand.
Well, I see no reason why you can't go, if you get all your work done.
And both she and the stepsisters continually add to this list all day. Cinderella perseveres, accepting whatever task they tell her to do, and completing it conscientiously. Each of these chores makes up another trial for her, especially as they prevent her from making her own preparations for the ball. The fourth step is an illusion of success. Cinderella is momentarily heartbroken because she completes all of the chores, but has not had time to work on her dress all day, so is sure she will not be allowed to attend the ball. But then she finds that her mice friends helped her out and made over her mother's dress while she was working, so she will get to go. We know, of course, that this is an illusion of success because we saw the way Lady Tremaine and her daughters reacted to the prospect of Cinderella attending the ball.
Of course. I said, if.
Oh, if.
As is often the case in visual media, the fifth and sixth steps occur at basically the same time. Cinderella experiences spiritual aridity and gets to her lowest point when her stepsisters rip off parts of her dress and she goes out crying into the garden. The one desire she let herself have has been thoroughly broken, and she is disillusioned with her life, no longer able to look at the bright side, and finally having to admit how bad things really are to herself. And I just have to say, this scene is extremely disturbing to me. The opening narration says Cinderella is abused
While Cinderella was abused.
by her stepfamily, but I did not think we would see gaslighting and assault in a movie for children. So this is the lowest point for me as well. The seventh step usually involves the heroine determining to make a change in order to be successful. For Cinderella, we can certainly say that she urgently wants a change in her circumstances, and it appears in the form of a fairy godmother, who is obviously a feminine figure. As I said in the previous section, I do think the fact that the fairy godmother appears and fixes this does diminish Cinderella's agency, since most characters decide to make a change for themselves at this point. Padme insists on going back to Naboo. Elizabeth and Diana reclaim their identities. I think that is why most Cinderella retellings have her more involved in the process of going to the ball, as a way to give her more agency. An easy way to give some agency back would be for Cinderella to wish for things instead of just being given them, or for the dress that the godmother conjures to match Cinderella's own designs, instead of being wholly new. Even repairing the dress she drew and that her friends made for her would have given her more of a role in this scene, instead of being as uninvolved in the magic as her dog or the mice. In any case, Cinderella moves on to the next step of the journey, healing the split with the feminine. I think this is more reclaiming her role as an independent person, not wholly defined by how her family sees her. She is no longer a maid or a cook, but gets to be her own person. An idealistic young woman at a party who wants to dance with this nice boy for a while.
After all, I suppose it would be frightfully dull and boring and completely wonderful.
And I think it's important to consider how little her wants have been met or even considered in this movie. She says she was dreaming a wish at the beginning, but otherwise does not dwell on her own desires, and instead just focuses on getting through her chores. The parallel with Bruno the dog I mentioned in the first step comes back here.
Bruno. Yes, Bruno! Quick, get Bruno! Get Bruno!
When Cinderella finally lets the dog chase the cat as a way to help her escape her stepmother's trap. Again, not a subtle parallel. The ninth step is making peace with the masculine and with her allies. Cinderella did not begrudge her mice friends for taking things that led to her stepsisters feeling justified in destroying her dress, but this part of the film features them redeeming themselves by taking something more valuable, the key to her tower. She has been locked in by her stepmother, and her masculine allies, Jock, Gus, Bruno the dog, and even the horse, help her to escape. The final step is the integration of the masculine and feminine to become a whole person. Despite Lady Tremaine's last-minute attempts to keep her from being recognized as the maiden from the ball, Cinderella reveals that she has the pair to the glass slipper, so obviously is the girl the Grand Duke is searching for. And then she gets to take her masculine allies and become independent of her stepmother at last by marrying the prince and moving to the castle. Overall, I think Cinderella certainly goes through a complete character arc in this movie. The prince is not relevant until the very last step, serving as the same deus ex machina that the prince did in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. These two princes have almost nothing to do in the movie, so I find it strange that their existence is so often decried by people who feel these films teach bad lessons to little girls. The basic structure of these films is that the woman faces adversity that is directly due to familial and societal demands of her, perseveres through it, and is successful because she changes her familial and societal situation. Think of any character in a bad domestic situation. There are a limited number of ways to escape it. You can inherit a lot of money, or win the lottery, or have surprise magic powers, or be able to invent something. But basically, the solution involves some kind of social mobility. For a lot of history, the easiest way to move up the social ladder, regardless of gender, was to marry above your current station. I mean, that's what Aladdin is all about. If this was the magical tale of Cinder Eddie instead, it would be just as likely to involve catching the eye of Princess Charmina as a way to get out of his situation. I mean, I would definitely be down for a Cinderella story where she wins the lottery instead of getting married, but rising so far above her stepfamily that she will literally be their ruler is a pretty cathartic ending. Regardless, the story is about Cinderella escaping an abusive situation, and I think that fixating on the exact means she does so kind of misses the point. Alright, finally, let's discuss the emphasis on beauty and general girliness that Disney princesses get a bad rap for. In considerable contrast with both Snow White before her and Aurora after her, Cinderella is called beautiful exactly once,
Cinderella's charm and beauty,
and her appearance is never otherwise remarked upon. Snow White's whole plot is based on her being prettier than the evil queen, but this is not the case for Cinderella at all. The opening narration refers to her charm and beauty, and then it is never brought up again. Now, we don't know why the prince chooses to cross the room to see her when she comes into the castle. Perhaps because she is dressed differently from everyone else. Perhaps because she obviously has no interest in him, which must be refreshing at a ball thrown for ladies to meet him. Or perhaps because she appears magical, given that her clothes were conjured up by a fairy. Whatever the reason, we don't need to assume it's because she's pretty, because plenty of other girls there are pretty. Not the stepsisters, of course, but the generic background characters. I suppose, then, that the real complaint is the commodification of Cinderella as a brand, and especially her ball gown being the default for merchandise. Now, to be honest, I hated wearing pants as a child and wore nothing but dresses for much of elementary school. To be even more honest, I'm wearing a dress right now, so perhaps I'm the wrong person to be talking about this. But to go back to the story, it is true that Cinderella is wearing this dress when she catches the prince's eye. But do we really think that little girls are wearing these dresses to attract a man? I think it's a pretty reductive view of women to think that we just dress up to catch the attention of Prince Charming. And I'm fairly certain that little girls just think of the prince as a convenient stepping stone to getting any number of things that would be great about being a princess. And I'm pretty sure that for most girls, being in charge is more appealing than being coddled. If anything, I think this is a negative story for boys to be reduced to just a means to an end, but no one ever talks about that. So yes, girls like to wear the princess dresses, and Cinderella started the trend of ball gowns, but that's not going to stop any of them from deciding to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. I wore plenty of dresses as a child and now have a semi-successful YouTube channel. Oh, and a PhD. Anyway, I do have a more detailed analysis of all of Cinderella's costumes in the link in the description, but let's talk about what I do think is a little problematic. The comparison of Cinderella's design to her stepfamilies. Hey, ever notice that the so-called ugly stepsisters are more expressive than any other female character you've ever seen in animation? One of the more insidious things about animation is that male characters, whether they're anthropomorphized animals or actual human beings, get all sorts of interesting facial features and expressions. They can range in silliness, while female characters are never allowed to be anything but pretty. This is more obvious if you compare the prince character to any other male character in the film. He has to be handsome, so is stiff and uninteresting. The princess gets a bit more expression, but not much, while the sidekicks and villains actually emote. So I enjoyed seeing the stepsisters and how their facial expressions were much more interesting than anything we see Cinderella show, even though the sisters are much more two-dimensional as characters. Cinderella has many emotions and is even snarky at times, but because her character design is so safe, it doesn't leave the same impression. So I do think there is an implicit beauty equals goodness thing going on, but the stepsisters are never actually called ugly. Cinderella is never really called beautiful during the movie, so it is not unlike the vast majority of animated stories. Thus, it's kind of an overreaction to denigrate this movie in particular for that concept, instead of, Western media as a whole. Alright, let's see what we have here. Does Cinderella have agency? No, but that is the point of the narrative, so shouldn't make you decide not to watch it, unless that kind of thing is particularly triggering for you. Does Cinderella rely on a man? No, not at all. If anything, she is over-reliant on her mice or her godmother, but she certainly does the best she can in her situation. Finally, is there an emphasis on beauty? Not in the text, no. It suffers from the same problem animation, or film in general, tends to have, where being aesthetically pleasing is essential, but Cinderella's beauty is not instrumental to her story. So it's a great movie, right? Well, I do have one complaint. There may not be an emphasis on Cinderella's beauty, but there is on how she tolerates and accepts her mistreatment. She gets annoyed sometimes, yes, but never really acts like people who were actually raised in such an environment would act. She suffers correctly, never throwing a tantrum or taking out her frustration with her family on anyone else. She even puts up with the cat getting her in terrible trouble and trying to eat her friends.
So if you don't want to lose a nice warm bed, you'd better get rid of those dreams.
Telling the dog not to chase the cat right up until the end because we should all just accept and forgive everyone who hurts us. I'm certainly not blaming her for her behavior, since much of what dictates how she acts is protecting herself from her stepmother's ire. But always being the bigger person, even when people are physically hurting you, is not a great lesson for any viewers. And I think this is a good example of an abusive situation, making Cinderella very aspirational, but not very realistic. And it brings up the distressing fact that people would begrudge her the happy ending if she dared to call out her suffering, or if she wasn't suffering correctly. So I think we should have more narratives where people in terrible situations are allowed to act a little more human and still get a happy ending. Now, this aspect doesn't make me not want to watch the movie, but it is something to be aware of, especially if you are showing this to children who are unlikely to relate to her because she is a perfect victim instead of a real one. So, final evaluation. Is Cinderella a good role model? I would say absolutely. She's in a worse situation than most other princesses, except Rapunzel, because it is her family who is hurting her. And this can strike home for a lot of kids, I'm sorry to say. So having a character who started out this downtrodden, who still reaches the heights of princessdom and gets a happy ending, is a valuable addition to aspirational figures and stories for children.
It's more than I ever hoped for.
Before we go, I'd like to give you a book recommendation. As I mentioned in the last episode, I adore fractured fairy tales, and retellings of Cinderella were always my favorite. I would like to recommend the absolute best of these, Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine. It's an extremely clever retelling of the story with excellent fantasy world building, so I can't recommend it enough. Please put your recommendations in the comments. Thank you for listening to me talk about Cinderella. Please join me next time on More Than a Love Interest as we take a little break from princesses and talk about Evie in V for Vendetta for no particular reason. But then we'll be back to princesses and talk about Sleeping Beauty herself, Aurora. Please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all the things so you don't miss it. See you then.